Hello and happy Halloween, miners. Welcome back to the channel, and today is the day before Halloween as of this video's upload. And we all know that Halloween is popular for three main things: the scares, the candy, and the costumes. Now, if you are unaware, the channel does have a Discord server that is linked to it, and one of the channels in that particular Discord is specifically designed for dwarf drip. It is where people can post some of the coolest looking ways that they have their dwarves kitted out, and I actually did a video not too long ago where I reacted to some of the most craziest and interesting ones that my viewers have put together. But today I wanted to do something a little bit different for the Halloween season and look over and review some of your cosplay or costume designs that you have made for your dwarves. Since Halloween is all about putting on a costume and going to get treats, I figured it'd be fun to look at your costumes and see what kind of a treat you deserve. So I went through and I looked through the Discord and I found a good amount of interesting costumes that I thought were kind of nice that I looked at a little bit, not super duper studied, and I'm going to be tiering them from C to S tier based on how cool and accurate I think that they are. Keep in mind this is solely based on my opinion, so if you think that some of these look a lot cooler than they are, that's perfectly fine. I just thought that this was a fun thing to do for the Halloween season. And yes, before anybody mentions anything, I know that I am shaven. I am prepping for No Shave November, so just keep that in mind before anybody mentions anything. I am well aware. So if you guys are ready, let's go through some of these fancy costumes that you guys have put together and see just how prepped you guys are for the Halloween season. Also, if you enjoyed this kind of video, be sure to like and hit the bell so that way you never miss another upload in the future. Alright, so first up, we're starting relatively meta with this first one, as this guy decided to make his character look like Mission Control himself. This is probably one of the scariest things that you could probably make your dwarf look like, because Mission Control is terrifying. In terms of making it look like it, even though we don't necessarily know what Mission Control's body looks like, I think him being a gunner is probably the most accurate depiction of him. Obviously, you have the mask, which works perfectly well. That's the Halloween mask that you can use. And the color scheme works perfectly fine. He definitely looks very creepy and a little bit off-putting. And overall, I think he did a pretty good job with this one. It's not anything super crazy. It's not anything wild. It's not ridiculously creative. So I'll probably give this one a pretty solid B tier. This is pretty nice. I like this one a lot. Then coming off the heels of that one, we have this guy who has made his character look like the king of rock and roll himself. Good old Elvis Presley. And honestly, the moves that you're doing in this particular shot kind of helps sell the picture as well. You got the hair, you got chops, you got the moves, you got the schmoves. The fact that you're the driller is a little bit awkward. I don't necessarily think I would picture Elvis as a driller, but you know what? The more I think about it, the more it kind of fits. So this is definitely going to be a high A tier. I think this is a phenomenal cosplay. The fact that you didn't just go with a static standing position, I think helps out a lot with this one. The fact that you actually decided to put on the dance moves definitely does help this one a lot. This is another really good one. Then we have this one who is trying to be a Robocop cosplay. And to be perfectly honest, aside from really the color scheme that you decided to go with, it works pretty well. I feel like it would have been a little bit better if you had chosen somebody who uses a handgun, or at least selected somebody who has a particular handgun. If you were using the engineer, probably would have been better if you had the stubby out, because I know one of the more famous shots of Robocop is him holding up his pistol. He doesn't really use shotguns that much throughout the films, if I'm remembering correctly. And again, the color scheme is a little bit odd. It's a little bit too white. He kind of has a bit more of a darker metallic sort of sheen to it. So that's probably a little bit where I would change it. But other than that, the actual design of the setup that you decided to go with is actually really nice. The visor definitely kind of sells it. The full body suit definitely sells it very well. So I'd probably give this one also a good B tier. I think you did a pretty good job with this one. Again, I think the colors and the choice of weapon are probably the only two things I would change, but this is a pretty solid one, and this deserves a good treat. So yes, high B tier. And then we have this guy who he basically just made his scout into kind of just a generic werewolf style using the brand new mask that we got for the Halloween event this year. And I think a lot of what I like about this one is the exact moment you took the shot of you stomping on the swarmer. I think that actually kind of sells it, because it has that sort of fancy sort of sheen to it, that sort of dramatic effect, which I kind of like. In terms of actual design of the costume itself, it's not really anything super crazy. The werewolf design for the mask is really, really nice, and it is probably one of my favorite Halloween masks that they have put out. I do think you probably could have sold it a little bit differently if you had chosen maybe a different body type, or maybe had a different skin type, because now it kind of does just look like you have a mask on. But again, the dramatic moment of stomping on the glyphid, I think, does kind of sell it a lot. So I'd probably give this one, I'm going to give this one probably a C tier, but a relatively high C tier. It's not bad, but I feel like this one is just a little bit too sort of thrown together last minute. Still pretty good though. So then we have this person who is trying to make their character into a Space Marine from Warhammer 40k. Based on the colors, I'm guessing he's trying to go for an Ultramarine setup. And it is kind of hard to capture the effects of a Space Marine with a dwarf, because the dwarves I think are like, what, 4'1" or something along those lines, and Space Marines are like 8'2" or something like that and weigh like 1,000 or so pounds. So trying to capture that is kind of difficult. However, I do think you did a decent job, at least in capturing the overall premise of it. The best selling point of this whole thing is honestly probably the weapon. The weapon does kind of look a little bit sort of like a bolter, kind of maybe. The color scheme is nice, and the sort of blocky machine-like pattern that it has definitely helps. I think if you had the mil-spec framework on your weapon, that probably would have actually helped it look even more like a bolter rifle, because that does look very much like a bolter. But I think the overall armor setup you have looks pretty nice. It's a little bit more like just a blue Helldiver than a Space Marine, but I can kind of see it. So I'd probably give this one a solid mid-B tier. I think you're doing pretty good with it, with trying to make a dwarf look like a Space Marine, but I think that you're more or less just limited by the fact that it's going to be very difficult to do that when, again, they just are two very different types of beings. But with what you were working with, I think you actually did a pretty decent job. So then we have this guy who did a very creative design for his particular dwarf, in that he decided to make his character look like Salvador from Borderlands 2. And honestly, bro, you kind of nailed it pretty well. You got the beard right, you got the hairstyle right, you got the skin color right. Like, honestly, just the entire setup, the color scheme you chose was damn near perfect. This is an S tier, if I'm being honest with you. This is great. This looks exactly like Salvador from Borderlands 2, even down to the color of the shirt, which is incredibly interesting that you were able to get something that has that much specific coloring to it. I'm not sure if you used mods for this to get the coloring to look that specific, but even if you did, it still looks really, really good. He even has the straps going underneath his armpits, just like Salvador does, and it works incredibly well. So honestly, yeah, this is an S tier. This is phenomenally done. Then we have this one that is attempting to pull off a Republic Commando-esque type look. So sort of something like Star Wars Republic Commando, which is kind of along the same lines as the Space Marine one that we looked at a little bit earlier. However, this one I think kind of does it a little bit more, because the line between dwarf and just normal stormtrooper / Republic trooper from the Star Wars universe is a little bit easier to achieve. And overall, I think this one actually is pretty good. You are using Scale Brigade, which, as I said in the last video, is kind of a cheat, because Scale Brigade just looks really, really good with basically anything. I do think you probably could have chosen a slightly different color scheme, because the fact that the armor is white and the lights coming from the helmet are also white kind of make it a little bit more difficult to differentiate between the two. And if you're at the very least trying to base this off of the main trooper from Republic Commando, he kind of has like a little bit of an orange sort of hue, or at least some orange accents in his color, which I feel like you probably could have done with something better with, say, the driller, but then you wouldn't have had the weapon options that the engineer has, which kind of make it look a little bit better. So it was kind of a difficult situation that you had to work with. I still think you did pretty well, so I probably also give this one a solid A tier. I think based on what you were working with, you did a pretty good job. Again, I think you probably could have chosen a slightly different color combination and it would have complemented it a little bit better, but with what you were working with and what you were trying to make, I think you did a pretty good job. Then we have probably a very legendary one that I was not expecting. We have this guy who made his dwarf into Steve from Minecraft, and boy howdy did you nail it perfectly. From the color of the clothing to the color of the skin to even the blockiness of the beard and even the coloring of the pickaxe is phenomenally well done. It looks like the Minecraft pickaxe, and the way that you have your coloring set up on the dwarf is just very well done. I believe this is modded, because I don't think you can change the coloring of the later hosens. If I'm not mistaken, you can't. So that's probably where this comes from. Now that I'm thinking about it, Salvador probably had the same thing, but either way, it is still very, very convincing and very good, and I think you nailed the Steve look pretty much perfectly. The hairstyle, I think, is just a nice little flex. It doesn't necessarily need to be that hairstyle, because you probably could have gone with like the buzz cut and it still worked out well, but it kind of somehow adds to the blockiness of it, which surprisingly works. I think this is another S tier, if I'm being honest with you, because this is really, really good. The coloring match perfectly. The theme is on point, and this again is not something I was necessarily expecting, but now that I'm thinking about it, it makes 100% sense that Steve would make a perfectly good dwarf because they're both about mining, so it makes a lot of sense. So phenomenal job, definitely another S tier. This is great. So then we have this guy who, at first it's kind of hard to tell, but when I saw in the description, he had said that he had wanted to make himself look like Saxton Hale from Team Fortress 2, but of course there's no bare-chested option for the dwarves, which Ghost Ship, that should definitely be something that you add in at some point in time. So of course it kind of looks more like Nigel Thornberry, but with it seeing what it's supposed to be, it kind of makes a lot more sense. And I still think you did a pretty decent job with trying to make him look like Saxton Hale. Trying to picture this guy without a shirt on, which is not a sentence I was expecting to say when I woke up this morning, I think that it would have worked out pretty well if you did have that option. And aside from that, I do think you nailed it pretty well. His facial hair is on point, the hat's on point. Saxton Hale would 100% be a gunner or maybe even a driller, depending. He'd probably be like a mixture of the two. And I think you did a pretty good job with this, and I'm gonna say this is another A tier. This is really, really good. Again, you were limited by just the fact that you didn't have a bare-chested option, which again, Saxton Hale could have really benefited from, but still did pretty good. And then we have this fine gentleman who has gifted us one of the most creative and impressive cosplays I have ever seen, depicting the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr.
America First,
Donald J. Trump, and my goodness does this look incredible. Skin tone is perfectly on point, the hairstyle is incredible. I feel like you could have gone a little bit more gold with the armor just to sell it, but I still think you did pretty good. The fact that he's a driller, I think, makes perfect sense and is very, very fitting for him. This is an S tier. This is an S tier. I love this. This is great. I completely approve of this. You did a good job. Not really much more to say about that. Phenomenal. And then we have this guy here with his gunner, who basically was trying to make a prime gunner, but when I see this, I just think he's trying to follow in the same footsteps of the Warhammer 40k guy that we saw earlier and basically make the God Emperor. And in that sense, he actually kind of made it look not too bad. This does look a lot like him when he was in his sort of prime. Obviously, the armor is not nearly as like gilded or flashy as it was back then, but I still think it looks pretty much kind of close like him. Again, I don't think he was necessarily expecting for that particularly to be his cosplay, but I still think it looks pretty nice. It looks a little bit basic, but just from a gold gunner perspective, it's great. But if he was trying to go for the God Emperor, I think he did a pretty good job. So I'm probably going to give this another solid A tier. I think this is pretty good. Very simple, but very effective. And then lastly, we have our final installment in this with our good friend here who is trying to make his driller look like the Doom Marauder, or the Marauder from Doom Eternal. Now, I have not played Doom Eternal personally myself. I played the first Doom, but I did not play Eternal. But I have seen plenty of memes surrounding the Marauder, and based on what I've seen, I think that you nailed this pretty good. I think you did a pretty good job. The fact that you chose Driller and the fact that you chose to have the axe out, I think sells it very much. The helmet design and the mask design, I think both work very, very well. I think you probably could have chosen a slightly different armor and color scheme to go with it, to maybe add a little bit more green into it, because his armor setup is a little bit more green and a little bit more sort of thrown together. It's not quite as clean as this, but again, you probably were just working with what you had. And I still think you sold it pretty well. When I saw that this was supposed to be the Marauder from Doom, I was like, oh yeah, I could see that. That works perfectly well. So this is probably going to be another high A tier. I think this is pretty well done. You did good with what you had. I would say maybe a slightly different color scheme, but maybe the driller just doesn't have access to color schemes that can fit that. And overall, you did a pretty good job. And there you have it. That was what, 10 or 11 different costumes that we looked at. They were all pretty well done. Some of them were significantly more creative than others. And I hope you guys liked this. I hope you thought this was a very fun little Halloween sort of treat for you guys. I hope you guys have fun during your Halloween time, whatever it is you're planning on doing. If you're planning on staying in, planning on going out trick-or-treating, whatever it is, just make sure you're responsible when you're out there. And again, if you want to showcase what your dwarf drip is, or if you want to show any sort of cosplays, or just if you like the way that your character looks, be sure to post them in the dwarf drip chat in the Discord, and I might do another video like this in the future. This is really fun, and people seem to like this, because when I did the last one, pretty much right after I did the first video, I got flooded with more submissions in the Discord itself, so keep them coming, because this is a lot of fun to do. And I hope you guys found this video entertaining and enjoyable. If you did, please be sure to let me know by hitting that like button, as it tells me what types of videos you guys want to see. And consider subscribing and becoming a member today, as it really helps out the channel a lot. It lets me do more stupid stuff like this. Rocketstone Miners, happy Halloween, and I'll see you in the next video.